I received a return request on this VCR DVD combo the other day. Now, there's nothing too unusual about getting returns. It's part of selling on eBay. And these are notorious for breaking during shipment or just being broken in general. However, there was a few red flags with this buyer that made me look into the buyer a little bit further. And what I discovered might be a group of scammers using eBay to fuel their other businesses. So, as a buyer on the eBay platform, it's pretty rare for you to have negative reviews because sellers can't leave buyers negative feedback. However, some sellers do leave negative feedback, but it's disguised as a positive feedback. So, here is just one of the many negatives that this buyer had. Scam, 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 scam. This is not a positive feedback. This buyer bought from me multiple times. Every time there is a issue with the VCR, even though they are fully tested before being shipped. He intentionally breaks the items. I received the VCR back and many parts were taken off of it from the inside. Complete scam. It's shameful. eBay does nothing about this. Cancel immediately if they purchased from you. Scam, 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 scam. Someone else sure thinks this guy is a scammer, but I'm not positive about it, and I'm going to need your guys' help. Before diving deeper into this buyer and this transaction, I want to go over some common scams on eBay and how you can protect yourself from these scams. Online scams are nothing new, and eBay is no exception. I personally think eBay does a great job at removing actual scammers from the platform. And in general, if you follow their procedures and policies, you're pretty well protected from actual scammers. Now, there's another group called bad buyers. In my opinion, a bad buyer is more frequent on the eBay platform, and eBay has a really tough time on finding these bad buyers and preventing them from buying future items from sellers. So there's two different categories here. In my opinion, a scammer is someone that's doing this possibly professionally, but they're definitely doing it for large gains. A bad buyer is someone who's maybe opening a item not as described or an item not received case occasionally to try to offset some kind of cost or possibly get a free item without having to return the item. The difference between these two is the level that they've rise to. Sometimes a bad buyer might experience that, hey, I can lie about an item and the seller's going to let me keep it and refund me, and then they work their way up to becoming a scammer because they realize how easy it is to do. Scammers are the ones you don't really have to worry about too frequently because I believe eBay does a great job of keeping these people off the platform and protecting sellers from scams as long as you follow their policies and procedures. Let's break down some common scams and bad buyers that you might experience on the eBay platform. The first one is change of address. Now, this one might seem kind of unassuming. You may sell an item and then afterwards you're going to receive a message from the buyer saying, hey, I need this item shipped to this address. I put in the wrong address. Now, eBay is pretty cut and dry about this. If you just go and ship to another address that eBay didn't provide you, not the one that's on the order details, but any other address, you are not protected as the seller. So if you get this message, the best thing to do is to message the buyer and say, hey, I'm sorry about that. I can cancel your order for you, and then you can reorder the item using the correct new address. That protects you and the buyer. Now, there's a reason behind this. So if you ship to a different address than what the buyer said, the buyer can then claim that they never got it, and eBay's going to look at it and say, hey, you didn't ship it to the correct address, and that's why the buyer didn't get it. Buyer gets to keep the item, and you are out the money. The other reason behind this is some people will go on eBay and look through the solds, find an item that has sold recently, and message that person, that seller, and say, hey, I purchased this item, I need it shipped to this address. Now, this person didn't actually purchase this. They're just hoping that when you look at the message, you're not even looking to see if that's the actual buyer of the item. So the best and easiest way to avoid this is anytime you get that message, just say, hey, I can cancel this. Make sure it's the correct buyer. Make sure that buyer's name actually lines up with the order details. And then you can cancel that and tell the buyer to repurchase it. I usually cancel it, relist it, and then I'll send that buyer the new listing and say, hey, this item is now live. You can go purchase it with the correct address. If you don't do this, there are people out there that are scamming sellers that don't know better and aren't checking by simply saying, hey, I bought this item, I need it shipped to this address. The seller's like, oh, not a big deal, I'll just ship it to that address. They change the address on the label and they ship it there. And then the buyer's like, hey, I never messaged you that. And you were actually talking to a scammer that just received that item for free. When people are looking for who to scam on eBay, they're looking for sellers with low feedback ratings and with low sales history because they know they're the easier sellers to scam. So if you're just starting out on eBay, I highly recommend that you go on eBay and you start purchasing a bunch of items that you would need, whether it's for your business or whether it's just personally. If you start making purchases on eBay, you're going to start getting some feedback, and now your feedback score is going to start to show that you actually have some numbers behind it, and you're going to be less likely to be scammed. Another common message that you might receive from a buyer is saying, hey, this item arrived broken. I think I can fix it, or I still want it. Will you send me a partial refund? Now, this is kind of a personal decision here, whether you believe the buyer or not, but there are people out there that will buy items and then just immediately say to every seller, hey, this item is broken. I want my money back. I want a partial refund. So you have to determine what you're going to do. Me personally, sometimes I'll refund the buyer the partial if I believe them. You might be asking, how do you know whether the buyer's lying or not? Well, the easiest way to determine that is ask them for some proof. Say, hey, send me some pictures of the item so I can see what's wrong with it. Look at the buyer's feedback. See if there's someone that's been doing this a lot. Once again, this is a personal decision, but do realize that there are buyers out there that go on and immediately say things arrived broken just to see if they'll get a partial refund. I have a pretty strong policy of if I don't get the item back, I'm not going to refund you. And I'll just simply say, I'm so sorry it arrived broken. It's no problem. I accept returns. Go ahead and send that item back. And if it is a scammer, a lot of times they just won't even bother sending the item back because they know it's not worth the hassle. Another thing you might run into when you're selling items on eBay is items not received. So this is where the buyer will say, this item was never delivered. I want my money back. I deal with this one fairly frequently, but if you follow the eBay rules and procedures, you're pretty well protected on this. So the first thing I do is I go on and I look and see if the item was delivered. Now, if the item wasn't delivered, I'm going to go into the tracking and see where it is. I might open a missing mail request. I'm going to message the buyer back saying, I see this item is still working its way through the network. It should be delivered on whatever date. I've opened a missing mail request, and I'm going to keep my eye on this for you. But if it's showing that it was scanned and delivered to the buyer, you are now protected. As long as there's a scan saying that the item was delivered, eBay is not going to make you refund that buyer. If they open up an item not received case, all you have to do is go in and re-upload the tracking number, and in a couple of days, eBay is going to close that out in your favor, and the buyer is kind of SOL. Now, the reason behind this is there a possibility that that buyer didn't receive the item? Yes, there is a possibility. But more than likely, two things happened. Either the buyer is just lying and trying to get you to refund the item, or the buyer is a victim of theft, postal theft. Maybe the postal service left the package on their deck or out by their mailbox, and someone drove by and stole that package from them. Now, that's very unfortunate for that buyer, but you do not have to refund that buyer. That's a personal decision if you want to refund that buyer, but just know that as far as eBay is concerned, as long as there's a final scan saying that the item was delivered, you are now protected. I usually do message this buyer and say something along the lines of, hey, I recommend checking with your neighbors, family, and friends and seeing if someone might have saw the package and picked it up for you. And then I also let them know that if they reach out to their local post office, they actually have the GPS coordinates of where that package was scanned, and they can tell you where it was left. Maybe it was left somewhere where you weren't expecting it to be. Maybe you normally expect the packages to be left at the front door, and for some reason this one was left at the back door. So I always tell them to reach out to their local postal service. These next ones, there is really nothing you can do about, and that is receiving items back that are different, that are broken, that are damaged, that are opened. There is not a whole lot you can do when this happens. So if a buyer sends you back an item not in the original condition and you are a top rated seller, you can withhold up to 50% of that item. Or if you offer free returns, you can also withhold 50% of that item. Now it's only up to 50%. You're supposed to withhold the value of the loss. So if it was a brand new item and it sells for $20 brand new and they returned it to you in an opened condition, and now that it's used or pre-owned or open, it's only going to be worth $15. You can't withhold 10, you can only withhold the $5 to make up for that $5 lost. Other than that, there is nothing you can do. eBay is pretty cut and dry on this. I've gotten back items that are completely destroyed, completely open, unsellable, and all you can do and all they're going to tell you to do is withhold up to that 50% mark. You're going to end up eating some loss on that. You're going to end up having to pay for the shipping both ways and that 50% of that item. Now, hopefully your margins allow for it. Also, just realize this is cost of doing business. If you had a retail store, you would have theft, you would have breakage within inside that retail store. So it's just kind of cost of doing business. eBay doesn't know who to believe, so they err on the side of caution and go with the buyer because the buyer's confidence is what keeps eBay running. If the buyers don't have confidence in the platform, they are not going to continue to buy on that platform. I have heard that some people have had luck with reaching out to eBay and saying, hey, this person sent back a completely different item. This person sent me a box of bricks. If it's something extreme, I would recommend reaching out to eBay and seeing what they can do. They might be willing to handle it on a case-by-case basis. But something as simple as this item came back damaged or this item came back open or not in the same condition, they're just going to tell you to withhold that 50%. The other unfortunate thing about it is that eBay will keep 100% of the fees if you withhold any amount. So if you withhold 10%, eBay is going to keep all of the fees. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes it's actually better to just refund the buyer the full amount because then once you refund the full amount, eBay is going to prorate the fees. But if you withhold any amount, eBay withholds all of the fees. And the reason they do that is because sometimes when you withhold that amount from the buyer is going to say, hey, no, I didn't break that item. No, I sent them the right item or whatever. And they're going to open a case with eBay. 9 times out of 10, eBay is going to side with the buyer and say, we're going to refund the buyer out of our pocket and this isn't going to be accounted against you. What they're doing is they're using those fees that they withheld from you to pay that buyer out to say, hey, just go away, like here's your money. eBay doesn't really lose anything because they took the fees from you for withholding that original amount and now they're able to refund that buyer. They seem like the good guy at the end of the day and it didn't really cost you anything extra. So there's really no worries behind that, but do realize that if you withhold any amount, eBay is going to take all of the fees. Another common one is feedback extortion. That's where a buyer gets an item, they're unhappy with the item, and they say, hey, if you don't refund me, I am going to leave you negative feedback. This one's a pretty cut and dry case. If you have a message saying the terms of, if you don't do this, I am going to leave you negative feedback, don't worry about it. Send the buyer a very professional message just saying, hey, I'm sorry about the item. Feel free to send the item back. And reach out to eBay once they leave that negative feedback and say, hey, this buyer used feedback extortion. eBay doesn't allow that. They'll remove that feedback and you can continue on. Don't give in to feedback extortion. Don't just refund the buyer because he's having a temper tantrum and saying he's going to leave you negative feedback. Know that you're protected from that. This one's always interesting, and it's credit card chargebacks. So this is where the buyer goes on to their credit card or PayPal or whatever and says something along the lines of, I never received the item, or I didn't approve this purchase, or this item arrived damaged or broken. A lot of times eBay is going to send you a message saying that this buyer opened a credit card chargeback. They're going to put that money on hold until the chargeback is handled. And what they're going to ask for you to do is upload some proof. So if its item wasn't delivered, they're going to ask for you to send them the tracking number. If its item arrived broken, you can say something along the lines of, I offer returns. The buyer can return the item. Once I return the item, I'll send it back. And if the buyer doesn't recognize the transaction, you're kind of SOL, and the buyer's going to win that case. Luckily, eBay will cover you 9 times out of 10 with credit card chargebacks. Every single case that I've had on a credit card chargeback, and typically they're usually the I don't recognize this charge, eBay pays them out and I don't have to pay anything out. So they'll let me know that this is happening, and then they'll say something along the lines of, the credit card company decided with the buyer, eBay has covered the cost and you're covered. And then you don't have to do anything else. So if you get a credit card chargeback, give eBay as much information as you can to fight that chargeback, and then don't worry about it. Like I said, I haven't yet experienced a time where I haven't won the chargeback case, or eBay will pay the chargeback themselves and they don't worry about you doing it. It's part of your seller protections. Here's a couple general tips that I've learned from reselling that help me avoid bad buyers and scammers on the platform. The first one is to hit the like and subscribe button. It is a well-known fact that for every single like on this video, one scammer will quit and go find honest work. In all seriousness, the first thing I recommend is to keep everything on the eBay platform. eBay has a pretty standard policy that you have to keep all messages and all transactions on the platform. So if you get a message from a buyer saying, hey, I live in your local area, I'd like to come pick it up, what's your address? And they're not wanting to perform that transaction through the eBay platform, block them and move on. Or you can let them know that, hey, everything has to be done on the eBay platform if you think they're not a scammer. But a lot of scammers are looking to move off of the eBay platform because they know it's easier to scam you off of the eBay platform. The next tip I have is listen to your gut. If you receive weird messages of people saying, hey, I need this item shipped here, hey, will you do this, do that? If it's weird and unusual, listen to your gut. If it's saying there's something wrong with this message, then just ignore it, block that person, and move on. The next one is false INADs. That's the one where the buyer says, hey, this item arrived broken, this item isn't as described, and they send the item back and you have to refund them. It is what it is. It's just the cost of doing business. Refund that buyer and move on. You're not going to ever win that case with eBay. So the best thing to do is realize that it's the cost of doing business, that occasionally people are going to lie about the item just so that they can get free return shipping, so that they can return the item, so that they could return an item that they broke. Whatever the case is, they're going to force that return. That brings me to my next one. Offer returns. It's so easy to do. If you don't offer returns, you're opening yourself up to buyers lying. Realize that they can force a return and just lie about the item. If you don't want false INADs, people lying about your item, saying it's broken, not as described, then offer returns. If you sell a shirt to someone and you don't offer returns, the only thing they can do is say this item isn't as described to return that item, and they're going to do that. So instead, offer the returns. You can even charge them to return the item so that they have to pay the shipping back, but at least they're not encouraged to force that lie. Another great tip is to be professional. Realize that eBay has access to all of your messages. So when someone's messaging you and they're upset and they say this item arrived broken, or they're accusing you of being a scammer or a bad seller, take a minute. You don't have to answer that buyer right then and there. Take a minute, catch your breath, and then respond back. You want to keep everything as professional as you can. Go in and say, hey, I'm so sorry about that. It's no problem. I offer returns. Go ahead and send that item back. I'll process that refund for you. Don't get in an arguing match with the buyer. Don't say things that aren't true to the buyer. Just apologize and move on. Keep it very professional, because if it comes down to trying to remove feedback later on, or the buyer does something else and eBay looks at those messages and you're this rude seller who's accusing the buyer of breaking the item and things, they're not going to like that and they're not going to side with you. You want to keep everything super professional. Use the blocking tool. So eBay allows us to block bad buyers. So if you get a return that's not true, or if you get an item sent back that's broken and they didn't tell you it was broken, if you have a buyer that keeps messaging you weird things, a buyer that wants to move the sale off of the platform, just go add them to the block buyer list. It's super easy to do. eBay allows us to add a bunch of people to that block buyer list. I add a block buyer probably once a week. If someone sends an item back to me as an INAD, or if they send multiple returns back because they just can't read the description or whatever, I'm just going to block them, and then I don't have to deal with them moving forward. This might be the most important piece of advice. Don't be emotionally attached to the items you sell. If you are emotionally attached to the items you sell, do not sell on eBay. I have friends and family that ask, hey, I have this in my house, I have this old antique, I have this whatever, should I sell it on eBay? And I always tell them don't, because if you have any kind of attachment to that item, you're going to react emotionally when it gets broken and returned to you. If you're just a seller that's selling stuff that you found at thrift stores, yard sales, estate sales, you shouldn't have any emotional attachment to it. Just think of it as an item that you're sending out to receive some money back. So when that item gets broken and returned to you, you shouldn't be reacting to it. Remove the emotions from it. So if you're someone that's trying to sell something around your house that you have an emotional attachment to, sell it locally, don't sell it on eBay. Over the past 4 months, eBay has gotten a lot better. So if you have any kind of weird case or something that's strange to you and you don't know what to do, reach out to eBay. They've gotten really good with their customer service, and if you have a problem, they are your best bet. Don't rely on some guy on YouTube to tell you what to do. Don't rely on some Facebook group to tell you what to do. Go straight to the source and get the answers you need. The eBay customer service reps have changed slightly and they're more willing to help you now. So whether it's trying to remove feedback or a lost item in the mail, whatever it is, reach out to eBay and ask them what they can do to help you. And 9 times out of 10, they have been great lately and they're going to help you come up with a solution that works for you and the buyer. This is where I'm going to need your guys' help. After I review all the facts with you, I want you to leave down in the comments below whether you think this was an actual scammer or just a bad buyer. I got a return request on this, and I didn't think much of it until I started reading what the reasoning behind it was. The buyer messaged me saying, "Hello, this item will not switch to its DVD function. It's stuck on VHS." That was the first sign to me that something was a little bit off. Now, I personally tested this item and I know it was fully working when I shipped it out. Do these items break in the mail? Yes, occasionally they do break in the mail. These items are also notorious for just being broken. When I buy these items, I make sure to buy them super cheap because a lot of times they are broken and they don't work. But 9 times out of 10, when they are broken, the broken part is something to do with the VHS. It's either eating the tape or it won't read the tape. Switching between the two things isn't something I've ever run into, so it kind of drew my interest. So the first thing I did was hopped online and Googled the model number and see if there was some kind of common problem with this unit and some kind of way to troubleshoot it. I didn't really find much, but I did find some troubleshooting steps, and I sent those troubleshooting steps along with the actual manual to the buyer and said, "Hey, can you tell me more about what exactly is happening? And here's some troubleshooting steps and here's the manual." Now, when I draft messages to send to buyers that are having problems, I usually go into the order details and grab their name off of the order details. That way I can say, "Hey, Johnny, here's the problem with the item," or "Hey, Johnny, I'm so sorry that this item arrived broken." It makes it a little more personalized and they know they're dealing with a real person. I use my real name. At the end, I'll say, "Thank you, Travis," so that they know they're dealing with Travis and that they know I know their name is Johnny. So I went into the order details and I saw that this item was shipped to for office use. That's not a name. So I was like, that's kind of strange, but whatever. So I sent the message without the name on it and waited for a response back. I never received a response back. It shipped out immediately the next morning. And I was like, okay, I guess the item's coming back. No big deal. I'll refund them and move on. Hopefully it works. Hopefully I can get it working. But there was something inside me that said there's something off with this. For office use, not answering the messages a lot. Most times when I reach out to a buyer, they'll message me back and say, "Hey, I tried those troubleshooting steps. It doesn't work. I just want to return it." Or, "Hey, that fixed the problem." Anything. But they didn't respond back. So I thought that was kind of strange. The first thing I thought of was that this must have gone to some kind of business. So I grabbed the address and I Googled the address. First thing that popped up on Google with this address was badbuyerlist.org, and it was my buyer's username. And I was like, what is this? I have no affiliation with Bad Buyer List. I've actually never heard of it and I've never used it before, but I clicked the link and it opened up what would be described as like a blog page about this particular buyer. It seems like a site that just has people that go on and share bad buying experiences on the eBay platform. But this buyer in particular had a whole page about him, and he had a bunch of comments below describing all kinds of different transactions. But on the main details page, this is what it said about this particular buyer. This person is committing fraud on eBay with multiple people. They're buying electronic items that are nice and functioning, then claiming the item is bad and sending back damaged items. They're buying items they already own and are sending back bad items with different serial numbers or model numbers. Stay far away. I thought that was interesting. I wonder what item I'm going to get back. So I waited and waited, and eventually it was returned to me. And when I got the box, I gave it just a little shake, and I noticed immediately that it wasn't packed the way I had shipped it. This item was moving around inside. If you know anything about VCR DVD combos, they are very fragile, and if you don't pack them well, they're going to break. When I ship fragile items like this, I use foam sheets and I put this around all the sides of the unit so that it's protected. And I use a lot of bubble wrap. I use two different kinds. I use a small size bubble wrap and I use a large bubble wrap. And that gives it a lot of padding and protection so that it's not moving around in the box, and that if it was dropped, it would be fine. When I got it back, before I even opened it, I could tell that there probably wasn't much padding in that box. So here's what I got back. The item was wrapped loosely in some bubble wrap, not a lot of bubble wrap, and it was just the small bubbles. And then it was thrown in this big box that's oversized. It's the box I shipped it in, and it's oversized because I put so much padding around it that it needs to be a little bit oversized. And all they did was stick some paper in there. I didn't use this paper. This is from them. So they took the foam and all the bubbles that I had included, and they removed that, and they threw the item back in the box with just the paper and a few sheets of bubble wrap that were loosely wrapped around the item. And of course, the item was broken. So as I was unpacking the item, I immediately realized that this whole front was right off the unit. It's kind of barely hanging on. And I was like, well, it looks like they might have removed the front cover of it. That's kind of strange. The next thing I did was hopped over to the back and I checked the serial number, because when I was online and reading those forms, I was told that they were switching out items. This is the actual item that I sent them, but it came back in a broken condition. And then the final little thing is there's this chip missing out of this corner piece here. I didn't think too much of it at first. I was like, yeah, well, when you ship it with just some paper, it's going to break. And that's probably why the front cover here came off. But I looked in the box and this piece isn't in the box. That's super strange, because if this had broken off while being shipped, it should be inside the box, but it's not. So does that mean that they broke this before they sent it out? Did they try to remove this front cover here, and the way to get in was they just jammed their screwdriver into the side of it like that? I don't know. I don't know if they broke this on purpose or if that little chip piece here fell out in the packaging. But as you can see, I use a lot of tape and they retaped over this. There's really no place for this item to have slid out of the packaging. So I am now under the assumption that they broke this item and then threw it inside the box and shipped it back to me. But I don't get it. What's the scam? You buy my item, you break it, and then you send it back to me? I don't know. So while I was reading the comments left on that form and left on their eBay feedback, there's a few things that I realized. One is that the buyer has multiple accounts on eBay. There's at least 3 usernames that people have posted saying that they're all linked to the same person. Someone else went a step further and said that they did some research. They actually got the names of the people that are doing this, and that they were able to tie them to a few different LLCs, and that a couple of those LLCs came back to an Amazon account, and they were actually able to share the Amazon store. And when I go to that Amazon store, sure enough, they sell the items that everyone is complaining that they broke or scammed them out of. So they're selling PlayStations and Xboxes and DVD, VCR combos, any kind of like large electronic, they have their hands in. So I realized quickly that they are someone that's buying from eBay to resell on Amazon. But I still don't quite understand what the scam was with me. Because if you bought the item and you sent it back, what did you get out of it? You didn't get anything out of it. So I don't know. I go over to their eBay usernames, the 3 that they had listed in this form, and they have over 30,000 reviews. Now, they are a buyer, so they don't have any negative feedback. They only have positive feedback. And I didn't notice that at first. When I first got this return from them, I always look at the feedback and I realized that, hey, they're just a buyer, they have positive feedback. I didn't really look into it too hard. Then when I went back after finding this badbuyerlist.org, and I went back and looked at their feedback, I realized there was a lot of sellers that were leaving positive feedback, but in that positive feedback, they were complaining about scams. So I'm going to read you just a few of them. There are a lot, so I just picked and chose some of them. Scam alert. Read all this buyer's scam reviews. His bad reviews are the same. Sent the buyer a perfectly working VCR, fully tested, but he claimed it was damaged upon arrival. I think he was expecting either a partial refund or to let me keep the unit, but when I opted for him to return the unit was purposefully damaged. When the unit was returned back to me, it was definitely tampered with since the original shipping box was in perfect condition. I now blocked him. Now, what's super interesting is anytime that there was any feedback that was left that was kind of negative like this, the buyer actually responded back to this feedback. Now, as the buyer, you can go and ask eBay to remove this feedback because this feedback isn't allowed. As a seller, you're not allowed to leave positive feedback and then complain in the positive feedback. So the buyer could reach out to eBay and say, hey, this seller left me negative feedback. Can you remove it? And they would remove it. But instead of asking eBay to step in, what I believe, because they don't want eBay to know about them, is that they just respond back to the feedback. This is what they respond back, and this is almost what they respond back to every single comment. I am not a scammer. I needed this VCR. It was fully tested upon receipt and kept the original packaging while I tried to work with you on a return. I am sorry if the shipping carrier damaged this. I did not in any ways try to pack with care. I am sorry that you feel I am a scammer, but that is not true. Take care. And in some of them, they actually tell people that it's slander and stop saying that they're a scammer. It's super strange because if you were getting this feedback, you would just reach out to eBay and they would remove it. Here's another one. Negative, do not sell to this account. He, and they name the two people, get your items and say they are damaged, they then return a completely different item. They also you to the username and they have another username. He got me on this account and then tried to get me on the username. They are crooks and scammers. eBay needs to stop them. Beware, not an honest seller. Purchased an item and claimed it would not work, defective. After getting it back, just thrown in a box without ever even using enclosed bubble wrap, I tested it and it worked just fine. Cost me $45 in shipping. I tried to ask them if it might be their TV since it was UHD Blu-ray player, but he would not respond. Sold to another eBayer and got positive feedback because there's nothing wrong with it. Never again. Do not sell to this buyer. I wish I had read all the bad feedback about this buyer. I sold them a perfectly working PS2 system, and on the day it was received, a return was put in claiming it didn't work. When I received the item back, there was nothing to protect it. It was just thrown in a box. The controller was destroyed and left in an unsellable condition. For whatever reason, eBay refuses to remove this buyer. You have been warned. Beware, do not trust positive feedback. Buyer purchased a DVD VCR recorder. I shipped out wrapped and protected. After a few days, buyer claimed it did not play discs. Unit was brand new, filed for a return, received the item, thrown in a box with no wrapping, remote doesn't work, and unit plays discs fine. He tampered with the items he received and then sends back tampered, parts missing. eBay group of sellers are pairing their stories of how buyer has gotten to take advantage of so many. Avoid. They have 3 accounts. This is not a positive review. The buyer bought from me in the past and claimed the item I sent him was damaged VCR. He sent me images of a totally different VCR, not mine. Mine had marks on the buttons. Had to refund him to save me the hassle of shipping back a different item. Save your time and don't do business with this eBayer. Seller beware. Sent a working VCR DVD recorder, said it would not accept VHS or DVDs and was working before being sent. Mentioned damage, but when I got it back, had a big dent and broken front cover. Packaging was undamaged. If you look at the past feedback, buyer has these issues 4 or 5 times in just the past month. He responded back saying, I am not a scammer. I am a real person. I read the listings, review the photos, test and inspect the items as soon as it is received, and contact the seller if there is an issue. I need working items and should not be at fault or accused of such claims for receiving damaged or defective items. If you look at the life of my account and all my positive feedback, you will also see why eBay considers me a valuable customer and not a scammer as a few have alleged. This is ridiculous and slander. The seller responded back, "This guy is ridiculous. Please read his feedback. He moves enough volume that he looks to be a good buyer, but clearly not the case. He works the system that clearly favors the buyer. It's a bummer, but he knows what to do to make sure his eBay account is not affected. Based off of his feedback, this would be a high-risk buyer, and you're gambling if you choose your item to be taken advantage of." This one is from the website badbuyerlist.org, and this is a comment that someone had left saying, and they list out all their names, are scamming you by buying your items and trying to get them for free. They are turning around and selling them on Amazon. Seller store, they have multiple LLCs. You need to contact Amazon, eBay, and the FTC as they are actively stealing from you. All of this is public information. All you have to do is look up on the registered business page and type in the LLC. This is criminal fraud, and you can build a case just by putting the information together and contacting eBay. This is obviously a ring of scammers, and I archived all of it. Just search, and she is on all 3 LLCs and has been stealing your items on eBay and selling them on Amazon. Call the FTC, call eBay, call the Better Business Bureau, call whoever deals with consumer affairs in your state. It's a pretty bold claim. And there are a ton of these on this site about this buyer. And these are all very recent. These aren't all just over the past year. These ones here are all well within the last month. They did the same thing to me with a Bose item, had to file a claim with eBay and go through many hoops to win my battle against them. I have shown my personal eBay rep this too. Hopefully they'll get cut off. The majority of their feedback is fake, major scam artists. They are trying to do this right now with a typewriter. It was in perfect working condition when I sent it. Immediately got a return request. Doesn't work with pictures. They are clearly a different one. No idea what to do. I was scammed as well. I sold the VCR DVD combo that was fully tested. They claimed that it shut down immediately once the tape was inserted. Once I got it back, again, it was working perfectly. The problem was that they shipped it back with an audio cassette in the VCR, which rattled around while it was coming back. Luckily, it didn't damage the unit. We sold them a $350 camera that was in working order, and they just opened up an iNAD, added a photo of the camera in worse condition than the one in our listing that sold to them. Crazy. After a year of this stuff, they are still able to purchase and scam sellers to this day. So what did I do? I went in and I withheld 50%, and that was it. I reported them on eBay. I gave eBay all the information that I just shared with you. I said, hey, check out this website, look at their feedback. There is a lot of people that are saying that they're scamming them. They shipped the item back in a broken condition. They didn't use packing. I gave all the information that I have to eBay. What will eBay do with it? I don't know. I don't know if anyone even looks at that information. I know from previous experiences that if I reach out to eBay on the phone or on Facebook and say, hey, this is what happened, they're going to simply just tell me to issue the refund minus the 50%. They will not fully reimburse me if I got the item back. It doesn't matter what condition it came back in. They're not going to let me keep all of it. So the best thing I can do is withhold that 50% and move on. This is just part of business, and I realize that. It sucks. This is the first time I've experienced someone that seems to be an actual scammer. I have sold thousands of items on eBay, and I think eBay does a great job of keeping these people off the platform. But every once in a while, someone does slip through the cracks. I don't know what the scam was. I don't know if there's a part that's inside of that unit that's valuable that they took out. I'm not going to sit here and tear it apart. I don't want to waste my time. I'm going to just move on. If you know what this scam might be, leave it down in the comments below. Okay, so after reading all these comments and thinking that I might have gotten an item back in a different condition and then receiving that item back what looks like in a tampered condition and damaged without shipping it properly. This is a buyer that sells on Amazon, sells these items on Amazon. They know they need to be well protected when shipped. So he definitely is at least a bad buyer, because a good buyer would know to pack the item the same way it came so that it doesn't break when you're shipping it back. But this guy purposely shipped it back in this condition. So at a minimum, I'm labeling him a bad buyer. But there's two more things that you should know about before you make your decision on whether this is a bad buyer or a scammer. The first one is that he has over 30,000 reviews between his three accounts, and the vast majority of those are positive. The vast majority of them are very vague and generic that sellers usually just send out regardless of what happens. But regardless, he has a lot of positive feedback. So are these just rare off cases? I don't know. The other fact is that he's actually purchased from me before. About 6 months ago, he bought a Dymo label printer from me. I shipped it to him and there was nothing wrong with it. There was no issues with that transaction at all. So why did he keep the Dymo label printer? Maybe he needed it. I don't know. Maybe that wasn't an item that he wanted to scam me out of. Maybe that's his thing. He buys one item so that you don't think he's a scammer, and then the next item he does this on. If you enjoyed this video, I know you're going to enjoy this one about a bad buyer that I had an experience with. So go ahead and click it.